Welcome back to the VET S.O.S podcast on the Scoop channel. And today, sitting on the stoop, we're going to get the scoop on this book right here, Veteran Stories of Transition and Transformation, by the two doctors that we have here. But before I even start, let me share a little bit. Let me give y'all a scoop on these two fine gentlemen that we have joining us today on the Scoop. This book that we're going to be talking about captures the raw, real, and remarkable journey of 25 service members as they navigate the battlefield after the battlefield, the transition to civilian life. First up, first on the mound, first at the batter's plate, we have Dr. Robert Turrill. He's a leadership powerhouse, a longtime faculty member at the University of Southern California. He's also an Army veteran, a professor, and the founding director of USC's Masters of Business for Veterans program. His career spans academia, military service, and decades of shaping ethical, mission-driven leaders. And standing shoulder to shoulder, side by side, is his counterpart, his co-author, Eddie. He's also a veteran, Army and Coast Guard, y'all. So we got an Army Coast Guard veteran in the house. He's a USC alum of the MBV program and co-editor of this groundbreaking collection. And he's a storyteller, a scholar, a champion of veteran voices. Eddie brings authenticity, insight, and lived experience. Together, these two, they just published this book. They didn't just publish this book right here. They launched a movement. One rooted in resilience, identity, growth, and legacy. They've turned the spotlight, and this is what we're going to talk about today, on voices that need to be heard and stories that deserve to be seen. So if you ever wondered what true leadership looks like beyond the uniform, these two right here are it. So if you're navigating your own path from service to civilian life, or just need a dose of purpose and power today, you're in the right place with the right guests at the right time. So let's welcome to the Scoop the doctors of veteran stories of transition and transformation. Welcome, y'all. How y'all doing today?
Thanks for having us, Kingsley.
Welcome. Professor, how can you hear? Are you good? Can you hear us out there in California?
Yeah, I'm here. I have to talk a little louder, I guess.
All right, awesome. So I just want to remind people, don't forget, and you don't have to drown in the sea of transition. Grab that VET S.O.S lifeline. We're here to help. And that's why we have today. We're going to be talking about this book right here, this collection of stories, and what prompted these two fine gentlemen to put it together and publish it and share it with the world. It's not here sharing it with us. So I gave y'all a little bit of the scoop about these two, but I want them to introduce themselves. And we'll start off with Professor Bob. What's the scoop on you? I know. I see the flag in the back. I see the book in the background. What's the scoop for Professor Bob? Let's get a little insights.
Well, I started in this business in the late 60s and have been active in it ever since. And so when I was asked to do this new military program and develop it and then, run it, I said, well, probably it's too late in my career to do that. Because I'd been in the Army in the late 50s. And what I found with when we put the program together, what I found with the students, and this is one of the key issues for me, is that everybody sitting in that room was service-oriented. That may not mean a lot to you right now, but it did to me because that wasn't the way it was when I was in the Army in the 50s. We were there because we were drafted. We were there because it was duty. We were there because we had an obligation. And so we served honorably. But the motivation and the awareness was quite different. And this was my first big awakening working with veterans. I'd never worked with a group in which the entire group was service-oriented. So we made sure this was a collaborative experience and they all supported each other. And it just started in 2013, cohort 1, now we're in cohort 13, 13 years later. But it's been an amazing journey for me and transformational in my own life. And I think that's important, meaning that we all can continue to learn later. I think we have oftentimes a too short of time horizon for our own future, our own career, our own learning and growth, and that we need to extend that time horizon very early on so that we can be the best that we can be, to pardon that expression. But and so this was kind of the culmination of my career. And so I felt that the program was so unique, it should be documented. At the university level, we're not very good at doing this. We run things, we do things, we offer programs, but we're not very good historians. I said, that's a mistake with this program. We got to document it. So I started writing the first book. After going to Navy SEALs retirement, after the program had been out for a couple of weeks, we'd been finished. And he just said, if you want to come down to San Diego to my retirement celebration, come on down. And I thought there was just a perfunctory comment. So when my wife and I got down to the celebration in San Diego, I looked around and there was 40% of the class that had just left. 40% of them showed up for his retirement celebration. It was a very emotional experience. And I started that night writing notes. I said, this has got to be captured. Something's going on here that is not average. It's not typical. We need to capture it. After the first one came out in 2000, then the issue was, I just had this feeling that we needed to follow up to this. Universities, again, aren't very good at tracking their alums and what happens to them, later. So I said, I want to know, where are they now? And I want to know in their own voices. To me, that was key, because if you read most things about veterans, it's somebody else's voice. It's commentators, it's journalists, it's academics or whatever, that it's always somebody else's, and you get somebody else's point of view. And I felt there's way too many stereotypes about veterans. It's all the things were written about how broken, homeless, and desperate they were. Or on Memorial Day, we have all these heroes out. And all things are true, but the students sitting in front of me weren't necessarily in either. Some of them were in some of those groups, but not necessarily. They're different. They're citizens. They're people going to grow and then offer their leadership to our community. And that, to me, was the issue. I want to know where these people are, and I want them to tell me. I don't want to have to interview and then interpret that. And so that's where and Eddie joined me. He had just finished his doctorate the year before, and said, I'd like to join you. I said, well, yes. I said, that'd be great. So we've shared, for the full 2 years of this, we've shared every experience possible with the struggles people have in writing their own story honestly. These are all volunteers. No one, they were invited by me, but nobody was, they're alums. They aren't required to do any of this. And that's important, because they said, no, I want to be part of this. And so we kicked it off from that point of view, is that these were all volunteers. And we had a number of volunteers that never made it all the way through. Storytelling, Eddie's going to talk more about that, is very tough to write an honest story about yourself.
Thank you.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Awesome. Yeah. So I appreciate sharing that. And I just want to pull an Eddie right here. So how did your journey start out? So you did time. So you shared that you did time in the Army, you did time in the Coast Guard, and how did you end up getting to this program to meeting Professor Bob and then start to get together and get this collection going? Like, what was your journey and how did you get to this level right here? What's the scoop on that?
Thanks, Kingsley. So I ended up leaving the military after 11 years. At the time, I have a son with autism, and being gone and the deployments was very challenging for him and as a family. So I decided to look for another path to be able to support my son. So with that in mind, I applied to the University of Southern California. I did the teacher prep program, so I really wanted to focus in education and learning as much as I could about autism to help my son. And after that program, um, as Professor Turrill mentioned, the MBV was freshly minted. I ended up being in cohort 4, 2016, and that's when I first met Dr. Turrill as our leadership professor and the director of the program. And I was really inspired, right? I saw him as somebody that I admired and looked up to, and I said to myself, I want to be like him when I grow up. Um, and as a veteran, and then I realized, right, that he had a PhD in his background in leadership. So finishing up that program, I moved to Texas and decided to pursue my PhD, becoming the first PhD out of the MBV program. Continued our relationship, and he wrote a letter of recommendation for me to get into the program and continued to support me throughout. And after finishing up my dissertation and completing my PhD, we tag team and got on this project together. So I'm honored to call him my professor, a mentor, and I dare to say a colleague now. I'm just honored to be, like you said, side by side. I'm really happy to be here sharing space with you guys.
Wow, this is perfect. It's a great segue into hearing both of y'all stories as how y'all started out in the military service, but it all started from service to self, right? So you started out in the service, Dr. Ray, you started um, uh, back in the day, and Eddie, you came along years later, but y'all have the same passion. Y'all had the same passion as, hey, let's put together a collection of stories so they could tell their side, because as we talked a little bit earlier, that it's difficult for a veteran to share their story, right? It's difficult because I know we talked about, like, to get those 25 stories. I'm sure y'all had to go almost like pulling teeth, right? Like come on, tell your story, like, because a lot of veterans, they're very reserved into sharing their story, because for me, I'm a veteran, right? I don't want somebody to see my story and start picking it apart, right? Start nitpicking it and start criticizing, why you ain't doing this, or why you ain't do that, or why did you do this, or how come this didn't happen. As a veteran trying to ask other veterans to share their story, how difficult was that to have 25? I know it probably, those 25 probably yielded probably about 300 or 400 invites that went out, and then 25, or maybe even less than 25, you had to kind of probably get up to that. So what was that process like?
Well, I just sent out the proposal and the invite to write and told them what the issue was. No, we got about probably 45 people signed up. And again, all volunteers. Nobody was pressured to do anything. We told them we'd like to have the stories told. We think they ought to tell them. And we'll guide them to that process. And I think Eddie and I learned a lot by doing that. We learned how to adapt to a very difficult process for them. But remember, all these 25 plus everybody else are my ex-students. So I know them personally. And so it wasn't like I was asking strangers to tell me their story. It was me. And they had written personal papers for me before. They have to set personal goals. They have to talk about how they achieved those goals. They had a goals partner. So there was a buddy system inside that they had to operate with. And so they learned to do this. And then we would sometimes debrief in class. We would talk about some of those issues and talk about leadership in the context of the issues we face every day. And so it has to do, leadership, from my point of view, starts with developing your own self-awareness and understanding of your strengths and weaknesses and what are the goals you want to do to develop. I found a marvelous reception from the veterans. I didn't have to convince them that this was a good thing to do. With MBAs, it's a little different. MBAs want to know they're already adults. Why do I need to do this? That's, well, with the veterans, they just said, yeah, how far and how high should we shoot? And so it was amazingly easy. So I think when we got for them to become alums, they had been through some of this before, talking about themselves. So to go the full route, your personal stories, we had people who did easily seven drafts, and we would get feedback on every draft, and just so that they fit kind of the models that we were hoping to achieve. Starting with your early development. Where'd you come from? What was it like? What got you in the Army or the military? What'd you do in the military? How was it transitioning? What'd you learn? What did you face? What were your difficulties? How have you handled it? And so they had to write their own story. One of the things we found out, Kingsley, is that writing your story and then owning it, the owning piece is extremely important and tough because you're going to share this publicly now. So you have to be okay with the honest statement of your own journal. Eddie, is that fair enough to say?
Yeah. Thanks, Kingsley, for the question. I think a lot of it had to do with trust, right? You talked about it. How do I do this, right? And so we had the initial trust from our fellow alums. So I think that was that wasn't a challenge. But if you were going to start writing program, developing that trust with each other, right, and then being vulnerable and opening up to your own story, Kingsley, and so I'm a big proponent of leading by example, right? So my PhD, my dissertation, that's exactly what I did. I went in deep, and I put down on paper as much as I was ready to put down, and I think that is the power of owning your own story. At the end of the day, nobody's going to tell you what you can and can't write about yourself, your experiences, your reflections. So when you get past that first level, right, of saying, hey, I'm gonna dive into some of my experiences and reflect, and then that second step is really, again, that trust. Kingsley, you're sharing that story with Professor and I, and we're giving you feedback. We're not criticizing, right? This isn't a paper for a grade. This is a different type
Right.
of writing, a different type of exercise. But again, going from what I put on that page to now sharing it with us, that's a big step. And then finally, understanding that, hey, if we publish this is going to be a story that can teach, around the world, right? That becomes a tool for public knowledge and healing. We also gave people the opportunity to make sure, right? If Kingsley, you wrote your story like, hey, I've gone through this process, but I don't want it to be published, then you have every right, to say that. And I think it's a good example of veterans telling their stories, sharing their stories, owning their stories, and not somebody else telling them, like Professor was saying. Because I've we see that a lot, and we don't control the narrative, right? It's always somebody talking about veterans this, veterans that. But when it's our own voices, when it's our own reflections, it just, as you'll read in those chapters, it just becomes so powerful and so real.
Right. So when I was going through the collection, it's huge, and I was seeing a theme like throughout the stories, right? Because each story is unique in its own. 25 stories, 25 worlds, 25 different journeys, but I've seen the core of it. It was coming back to the program, right? To the MBV program was the backdrop of many of these stories. So
Yeah.
what role did education play in the personal and professional growth of like you said, Eddie, like, hey, it was seven different times, like seven edits, seven redos, seven, like, what was that in that in that story? Because I'm sure that these individuals and like you said, Professor, it's all these were your students, right? They was all volunteers. So to start off and to get them on that path, how was that journey, or what was the thought process into having them share their stories and put it into the book so it could be published?
Well, one, I wanted to know where they are now. We didn't have any follow up, so that was my curiosity. Two, I thought their story should be told by themselves. And so we talked about that rather than somebody else tell it or summarize. If you notice in the summary chapter, we don't do much summary except draw attention to a few things that they said that are rather over again. But one of the things, Kingsley, we found out that I wasn't sure, and Eddie will talk more about this, but this book is a case of not only for the reader's benefit, but it's for the writer's benefit. So this is a two-way book, meaning you learn as much about yourself and what you hold back and what you're willing to share. You learn as much about your troubles and the struggles and the conflicts and anything that you had to struggle with. And now other people know about it. They can read about it. Maybe it'll help them. But it's helped you along the way. And I don't find many books that go both ways. The reader gets enlightened and maybe it'll help them. But the process of writing one story, as you'll see in those summary comments, came up more and more times as a healing process that just was very good for the writers and what they got, their insights. Some of their comments on their drafts were as interesting as the drafts themselves. There one woman she constantly commented on how she struggled, but she was doing better. In each draft she had more insight and felt more comfortable sharing that, things that she hadn't shared before. And so we could actually watch the writers, the storytellers, grow and change as they did the process. And we tried to encourage that. And we always kept a collaborative process focused, meaning we'd meet on Saturdays for process meetings. And it was always about them. It wasn't about good points of interest or points of theory or anything else. It was about how they were doing. And many times they came to those meetings just to be with the other people. Okay? That was one of the things I found out that was unique to this entire population, was the desire to be with other veterans, especially those that had gone through a whole year of challenge. Anything?
Yeah, I think you touched on it, Professor Kingsley. You need a lot of support, right? I mean, not to say you can't, read the book and go off and start journaling. I think that's a great start. But I think for the level of intensity of writing, of reflection that these authors did, we supported them for a whole year, twice a month, and in meetings, and also through email communication, through phone calls, through text. Everybody's got their best way to communicate. But that, I would say that using resources and supports to help each other through this process. And sometimes we'd have to go find our authors, right? Like they go radio silence.
Right,
and
right.
and again, having that trust, like Kingsley, hey man, I just need to know you're good. Let me know you're good. I'm not, it ain't about the chapter that's due, right?
Right.
And that's something that Professor can touch on. Initially, what our timeline was, and again, because we hadn't really done anything like this, but because of the care that we took, for the authors and ourselves, we ended up going a lot longer than we really expected to complete this book.
Wow. So when you was going through and these authors was coming to you and like, hey, because I'm trying to put myself in the shoes, because when I was reading, I was like, just like you said, the book talks about transition and transformation, and Professor, you hit the nail on the head when you said that, because as the author is writing it, it's kind of like getting it off their chest, right? Because that's the way I see it. Like, I just want to get it off my chest so it could just be out there. But then once it's off my chest, and in a book, somebody like me will come along and read it like, wow, I'm not the only one that's going through that, or I'm not the only one that experienced that. I'm not the only one, because as a veteran, that's what you think. Like, oh, I've only experienced this. I've been through this. Nobody else have. But when you start seeing these collections, like, I seen a part of me in all 25 stories, every single
Right.
one.
Yes, exactly. What was interesting too, Kingsley, is that there were three people said that they probably wouldn't finish because they didn't think their story was as good as other people's stories. And that was very interesting for us to handle because you hit it. These are unique. There are no other stories to compare yourself with. It's your story, and everyone is totally unique, and there's no other way it can be. So we aren't in a competitive process, and we try to keep that down throughout the entire curriculum and program. That we are invested in each other's success, and so we become a powerful support group through collaboration and concern about the progress of the other person, and we're committed together to our personal growth. That by itself is also unique. I don't know many, having been in the academic environment, taught in graduate and undergraduate programs. The concept of personal growth doesn't come up a lot. You usually talk about a field of study, whatever it is. I was in the business school, so you talk about accounting, finance, marketing, and so on. But the issue is for anybody in higher education is personal growth and transformation into the person you aspire to be. And that's kind of the guideline for the storytelling. If you can be honest about that, will lead you to making new goals for yourself. That was my sense. And make sure Eddie talks about storytelling because that was
Yeah, I definitely want to
that's
hear your part, Eddie. Like, definitely about the storytelling aspect, because I know when we was
Yeah.
talking earlier, like, man, it was rough. It was rough trying to actually storytell and let people see what you was envisioning and try to put it on paper so
Yeah.
people, because you're trying to paint that picture for everybody. So, share on how that storytelling can help get rid of that anxiety, with the stress and the I don't think myself will be good. Yeah, what's the scoop on that?
Yeah. So thanks, Kingsbury. So I think I see a generational shift for veterans, right? If we think about the old timers, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, um, that most vets that came home didn't share anything, right? They were a closed book. And I think, post 9/11, Iraq, Afghanistan, we're I feel like the book is a representation of this generational shift to be able to share our stories and reflect, even if it's just for yourself, right? I think the book does good work in being able to share it publicly, but I don't think that it needs to be. It doesn't have to be a public story to be able to be a useful tool, right? Kingsley, you got stories you could, if you're sharing them with your battle buddies, with family, with friends, I think that's a way to connect with yourself and your community, right? And I just hear a lot of stories of a lot of family members of veterans that have passed, and you know Uncle so and so or Grandpa, I got his DD 214 and that's it, right? And I had to look for it, after he passed away, and I think the stories are really what keeps us alive, and that's the way that I see it. So I feel like a lot of the authors, they, they wouldn't write it for themselves initially, right? They would say, "Hey, I'm gonna write this for my kids, or I'm gonna write this for my family." It was just, I'll write this for other veterans, right? Taking that self away from the veteran identity gave them the opportunity to kind of dive into themselves. But at the end of this exercise, they realized that it was for themselves more than anything, right? And then the stories become a tool to bridge these communities, right? The military civilian divide, and sharing insights. And I'll share some of the pitfalls that we found, throughout this process. Professor touched on the first one, like the self-doubt about the value of their story. You're sitting there, you're like, hey, my story is not as good, as these other ones. That's the first pitfall. So we had to chop that, like, nope, your story is as good as any others. You got to own it, right? Um, Two, the innate desire to compare stories. Again, it's like, hey, I don't have a silver star, bronze star, medal of honor. Like, leave those pages for somebody else, right? Like, I see you thinking. I see you thinking. And doubts about the process and outcome, right? So I feel like getting the buy-in to go through this process and see it through. And I think what helped the trust that we had with the authors already and my dissertation, right? Like, hey, I already put my hands in the fire, and I'm not asking you guys to do anything that that we haven't done, and we're here to support you. Very supportive environment. And those were the three main pitfalls that we saw in every meeting that we had. We had to combat those pitfalls.
Wow, and I wanted to circle back around. So, is this program, is it only at USC, or is it in based in other colleges as well, or is this
It,
the only sole location for the MBV program?
we helped the current director of the program, who's a retired lieutenant colonel in the Army, push the idea with Emory University in Atlanta that they could do this. And there was a retired General Ken Keene there who directed their leadership programs. And he came out and visited us. We talked with him. He actually spoke to the MBV one time, and he got it started. They are now in their second year, and a new two-star general, Matt Smith, has come in to be the leader in that program, and it's couched within a leadership concept, but it is an MVV. So there are two of us now. We were in publications saying what one program, has only veterans in it, and that was us. But now, in fact, Eddie, I just wrote a letter to Matt Smith, General Smith, today about his role. He's going to be out visiting us in October, and he wrote me a very nice note that he. Well, by the way, Eddie had both books on his shelf already, so we don't have to spend
Nice.
anything. Yeah, no, he was very gracious, very open, and so the answer to your question is, there's two of us now. Emory University and USC.
Oh, that's nice. And some of the quotes I took away from the book, one of the quotes was, "Leadership never leaves you; it evolves." So during that program, when the veterans is going through, and how long is that cohort? Is it, you said, usually 12 months, or how long? Like
Yeah,
when they start out,
10 months for us.
10 months. So when they come in, like, okay, this is kind of like a leadership program to put a collection of books together. So what is the projection forward for it? Will it be a next volume coming out after this one right here, to additional 25 stories, or what's the?
Well, right now we don't have a follow-on plan. I suspect it's going to percolate for a while to see how people, like this book and so on. Now we have to do this work. I think you have to be somewhat close to the people you're working with. And as Eddie mentioned, there's a lot of trust involved. And fortunately, we had it. And then I think having Eddie, one of my students, as a co-editor, really gave it that extra push for the trust dimension. That there was one of the people who actually experienced this, is helping edit and do the writing. Eddie wrote that first chapter on storytelling, so he led the way on the storytelling and why it's important and how he used it. So, in fact, because he did such a unique dissertation, it really set the stage, I think, for further work that he's doing now. And I think that's important because the ongoing issues are ongoing. They don't stop. They don't just go away. And so what helps is support. And if you can get your buddies together that you were in a unit with and keep in touch and do things together, that operates as support. I think when people get isolated and alone, that is very damaging for anybody, but it's worse for veterans who are suffering from PTS or anything. It's worse for them, I think,
Uh,
to be isolated and alone.
wow, yeah, I appreciate that. So, hey, can you touch on how to actually start a storytelling journey? Because I know with a lot of transition service members now, and that's like they pain point, right? They don't, they want to share their story, but they don't know how. They don't know where to start or how to share it or what how should be the leading. So can you give us a little insight, like how would somebody
Yeah.
start, like to start going down that storytelling path so they could get prepared
Yeah.
to release
Yeah.
some inside energy?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there's different modalities, and this is really the work that I strive to continue to do. I tell people my goal is to create spaces for veterans to share stories, right? And they come in different ways. For you've done it before. This podcast is a place to share stories, right? Or if you get together and you guys have a little barbecue, right? You get your battle buddies together. You got food, you got some good people, and what happens? It's natural, it's human nature for us to share stories. They're the best learning tool that I've come to find. Journaling can be a good start, in the writing process. So there's different, thinking of different ways, in person, digitally, in print and online. I started a journal at the Texas State University, the Jive Journal of Interactive Veteran Experiences. Shout out to the Outkick Library there for supporting it. But that's another platform, right? That we're student veterans there at the university can submit their writings, poems, pictures, anything. I think we talked about last time, right? You're using your DD-214 as a starting point, or critical incidents, as Dr. Turrill mentions. Just those moments, right? Like, hey, your first day at basic training, or where were you on 9/11? For most of us, we all remember Pearl Harbor being, another key for an older generation. But I think it's really just giving yourself permission to reflect on those experiences and to be proud of your service, of whatever that service was, just being able to to own it and to share some of those stories, the good, bad, and the ugly. And then as you continue to work through some of those memories, thinking about, hey, this is a story I could share with my professor, or hey, this is a story that I could share with my parents, or with my children, or or with kids at a public school. So having that ability, capability to be able to use stories as a way to connect outside of our community. And that, for me, that's what a successful veteran transition is. It's a veteran that can come home and be a part of their community, right? I won't knock you. I won't knock you if you want to sit on your rocking chair and watch the sunset, right? You deserve it. But I don't think that's a successful transition. I think when the veterans become an integral part of their community through the use of these stories and being able to connect and support, and they'll get you get support right back.
Man, that's awesome. Professor T, is there anything you want to add to that? Like, definitely on how to bring forth the storytelling aspect, because I'm sure that you've seen, because you are as 13 cohorts that went through right now, and Eddie was number 4. So I'm sure that you've seen the progression from the first cohort up to the one that's going on now.
Well, they finally kicked me out. Well, okay, you've been beyond your retirement age for quite a while now. I think it's time. But what I found is that they can't kick me out. Is that my connection with this group is real. It's not just in a semester basis. I found this group not to be just engaging with each other, but engaging with me, and they accepted me. I felt as part of them, even though I'd never seen my service as very meaningful, because it was during peace, Cold War. I was in at the time Elvis was in. I was in when Johnny Cash was in. So those are the people who were in, but they all were entertainers. And it was really different then. And the sense of mission, the sense of purpose, which are key to all this. The other thing I'd like to say, Kingsley, is that we learned during this process that it was important to focus on the process by using reflection of the writers, that we asked them. They weren't finished until they wrote a one-page reflection on what it was like for them to write their story. And I think Eddie would agree that we found that to be a very major, important part of the whole process, was to have them focus on the process and share their feelings about the difficulty of the challenges that so many times they want to quit, how to stay with it, uh, how to how to take our feedback and go on, rather if they saw it just as critical, they're not going to go on. But they see it as supportive, feedback, then they'll go on. If they can meet with others doing the same thing, then they'll go on. But reflecting on that, I think we found to be very important. And in fact, if you want to go through the book really fast, read their one-page reflections first. And just go through the book reading those one-page reflections, and you'll get a lot out of the book. You'll see what it was about for them. And again, it's not just for the reader. In this case, it's for the writer as well.
Yeah, so a lot of these one-page reflections, and that's where I seen me woven in to their stories. So I know for a fact that once others get a copy of this book, and we're gonna ask you if you could share how would they get a copy, or like where can they reach out to you, or can they go on Amazon? Can they go on at a website? Like, how can they get a copy of this book?
You want to talk about that? Or
Yeah, I sent the links, but also it's on Amazon and Barnes and Nobles. It's also on pinepeakpress.com, the publisher's website. And I think in the links you can reach us on LinkedIn, Dr. Robert Turrill or Dr. Eddie Arambula. But really happy to be here and to share. I'm very proud of this work and to be a co-author with Dr. Turrill and just looking forward to more connections like you and like VET S.O.S and sharing the good work that we've done together.
Yeah, I appreciate it. But before we go, I want to ask three questions. I have three questions. I like, wait, one more thing. So what's one takeaway you hope every veteran, spouse, supporter walks away with after reading or having going through this book? Like, what's one takeaway that you want people like, man, you know what? I'm glad that this book came out. I'm glad that these 25 great humans shared their story. It opened the light. What's one takeaway you want people to walk away with?
Well, the first thing I would say, it reminds me of when Eddie came out to Los Angeles after he finished his dissertation. I had read it, and we had lunch. We did that several times in the university club. And I said, Eddie, I don't know what else to say. I have one word. It was real. And meaning authentic, personal, real, dealing with the real issues that each person faces as they try to tell the story. So the authenticity, the realness. And so when the authors went back and read their stories again, they oftentimes had a different sense of therapy, a sense of healing, cathartic feelings. They got, as you say, they got something off their chest. And the fact that they dealt in a real fashion, not for somebody else's consumption, but for their own, was the key issue here. Because again, I'll say it wasn't just for the reader, it's for the writer. That we hope that we provided a space, a safe space, a collaborative space, a supportive space for veterans to talk about their own transitions. And the concept of transitions is ubiquitous. We all are going through them all the time, all the time. That's called age. It's called aging. And I'll tell you about that sometime. But the issue is get real, get authentic, deal with your fears. You'll find a way around them, and once you've done it, you'll feel free of it.
And I'll add that your story matters, right? And I'm speaking to you, Kingsley, right? Your story, and whether it's published or not, that it has value and it has substance, and it's important for yourself, right? So don't be shy and open up that box and start working through some of that. And I know you have, and you've shared with us some of that, and we appreciate the work that you're doing. But yeah, that your story matters.
I appreciate it. So like you ever heard that say if you hear the same thing from different people at different times, I guess something has to be somewhat true. So it's like I'm hearing it, bro, like, hey, you should say, hey, you should say, okay, I get it, I understand. I'm getting there. I'm getting close. I'm getting, it's like that anxiety, my anxiety kicks in, and I'm like, oh man, it's nerve wracking, but you're right because it's gonna help others. Just as a professor said, it's not just for the writer, it's also for the reader as well. So definitely heading in that direction.
Good. That's good.
So what? Just before we go, what's next on the list? What's next on the bucket list for y'all two? What's the next project that's coming up?
Well, as I say, right now we're just focused on getting the word out about this book and doing some of that marketing. We're not experts in marketing, nor was the book uh, intended to make money or anything. It was for our veterans, for ourselves, and to document the value of the program and the intervention that higher education can make in one's life. It's not just getting a certificate. It's not just saying, "Oh, I have an MBB, I have an MBA," or anything like that. It's what have you done for yourself that will give you lasting value and encourage you to go further with that? Meaning you don't stop. We got people, there's 25 people and 42 graduate degrees in that group. And yet there's people in that group that are still going on, you know, PhD in history for this engineer.
Wow. Right.
You read about the story in there, and it's amazing he's getting his PhD in history after being an engineer his entire career, also in the service. So, and his dissertation is going to focus on computerization of, I think it was the Marine Corps, Eddie, or the Navy.
Yeah, Marine
How
Corps.
computerization came into that, 30, 40 years ago. And so that's the history piece. But he's a technical guy and a Navy veteran. So
Yeah, no, I think both of us will continue to share, storytelling as a method of healing, and continuing to try to create these spaces for veterans to share stories, and partnering with other organizations that are doing some of this good work as well. But for me, it's a lifelong goal. We've lost too many veterans to suicide, and I think this can be an intervention that can help veterans stay alive.
Well, y'all heard it here on the scoop. Sitting on the stoop with these two fine gentlemen. Remember, you do not have to drown in the sea of transition. Grab that VET S.O.S. lifeline, and that's VET Share Stories, by the way, Eddie. That's the VET Share Stories, VET S.O.S. So you are in the right place. Y'all two are in the right place, and I know that this podcast recording is going to reach somebody that's going to reach out and get this book, and it's going to help them, right? Because everybody has to do their part, right? Oh, that's all we could do. We'll do our part, which is you and Professor, both of y'all are doing your part. I'm doing my part. VET S.O.S. doing it. Everybody's doing their part because there's somebody out there that's going to need to hear it. And just has these 25 collections right here. And you already see, look, the book is utilized. Like, this is a battle tested book. Like, y'all seen it, like, this not just sitting on my desk right here, right? This is, look, you know how many times I got some tape on the inside of everything because, like I said, these stories right here, I can see myself in every single one. Every single one. I see the 20-year-old kings in here. I see the 25, the 30, 35. Like, I see myself at every portion of when I was in the service. Every single story. So I know it's helping others because it's helped me.
good. Glad to
So
hear it.
I just want to say thank you, both y'all, for coming on, for sharing this book, for taking time out to talk about it, right? Because sometimes people just, you just see a cover like, oh, okay, yeah, that's cool. Veteran stories of transition, transformation. But it's what happens when you open it up and start reading that collection. That's when the power hits you. It hits you square in the chest.
Also, we appreciate your invitation to us to come on and talk, not just a labor of love, but a labor of involvement and caring, trying to help others continue on as well as to give feedback, for example, to the universities that these programs are special. These programs can deal with it. This program started with a retired Marine colonel who was operating as Assistant Secretary of State in California for Veterans Affairs, and came around and trying to get schools to talk about providing programs for veterans in their transition struggles. We were the only school to take it on in California, and we took it on in a special way in executive education, and I think that's the way Emory has started theirs, and then it's merged with the regular curriculum. But we are still a special program. We have our own career service person because this is a whole new area for most veterans. And so we have our own career service who is headed up by a veteran himself. So that is special. And to me, these special programs that go after a particular group of people that need them and that can use them should be celebrated and told. Stories ought to be told.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. Well, don't forget, y'all always welcome to come back because I expect another volume to come out after this in a couple of years. So by all means, you're more than welcome to come back. So until
Thanks.
next time, everybody, we see y'all later on the scoop. Peace.